Oh look, it's a belated Christmas present to myself. And hopefully to you guys, because I have been thinking about bringing back Failure to Launch for a while now. It was a series that I did for about a year or so, and then I just kind of stopped doing. But what better way to bring it back than by talking about the classic alien invasion / zombie / Tom Atkins being awesome flick, Night of the Creeps. And I can't talk about this movie without visiting one of the most famous locations from it, the sorority house. And you know, when it comes to this movie, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is your franchise is here. The bad news? It's dead. Back in 1986, Fred Dekker wrote and directed Night of the Creeps, a loving tribute to 1950s B movies. Just 1 year before Monster Squad, which he also directed. This one starts with an alien shooting an artifact into space, although there's clearly something up with the little guy. So I've always assumed that this little guy is taken over by the space slugs due to his eyes here, but he shows more intelligence and physical aptitude than the other infected people later on. So either different species have different reactions and the slugs have more control, or this guy is just a different type of alien than the others, one with malicious intentions and is not in fact infected. We're in 1959 on Earth and in black and white, which Dekker originally wanted to shoot the entire film this way. We meet young police officer Ray right before his ex's boyfriend is slugged and she's hacked up by an axe murderer. We then head to 1986 and we're back in color and meet JC and Chris, college uncool kids, and the lovely Cynthia and this guy with one continuous eyebrow.
Hey, you're cruising, man. There's no call for me.
Oh, and don't forget Mama's Family's Bubba, here as Brad with the most natural looking hair ever. To get into a frat, Chris and JC break into a lab and find the perfectly preserved Sluggo, and it wakes up, sending them running away at 40 miles an hour, screaming like banshees. Ray is older now and 1000% more awesome, complete with catchphrase,
"Thrill me, thrill me, thrill me, thrill me."
And he's on the case.
What is this, a homicide or a bad B movie?
It's neither, Ray. It's an amazing B movie. So what happens is that a slug jumps out and gestates inside of your head, making you walk around like a zombie in the meantime. After a short while, it multiplies and the corpse noggin bursts, with several more slugs erupting forth. JC ends up in trouble and not even the Monster Squad can save him, but he manages to discover that their weakness is heat and fire. Mr. Futterman shows up, as does Debbie, as Cameron, Chris, and Cynthia have to team up against a horde of the parasitic zombies.
I got good news and bad news, girls. The good news is your dates are here.
What's the bad news?
They're dead.
But oh no, there's a science project in the basement with a bunch of brains that leads to the final confrontation and one hell of a satisfying conclusion. So here's the thing, there are two endings to this movie. The original and intended ending shows Detective Cameron's burnt up body leaving the house, eventually erupting into slugs which enter a local cemetery. But there's hope since it appears that the aliens have actually arrived to clean up their mess. After a test screening in which audiences didn't understand it, which might have been exacerbated by the fact that the effects weren't finished at the time, the studio asked Dekker to change it and instead end with a more typical jump scare finale. So instead, we got the version that played in theaters and was on most releases, which is the reappearance of the slug dog and one last one pops out. It's not as interesting and makes less sense, like why would the dog still be around? Didn't his head burst open to create the football team zombies? Why is the gestation period so long here? Is it because it's a dog? But either way you slice it, the ending leaves it open for a follow-up. In both, there's still slugs to be found roaming around. A follow-up could easily have shown what happens next, and either ending could have involved the aliens returning to assist in ending the slug menace, even if that feels a little like Critters. And let's face it, without Tom Atkins' character around, would it even be the same? Any hopes for additional entries were pretty much dashed by the film's poor performance at the box office. The budget was a decent size for a B horror film of the time and cost $5 million. Comparatively, Friday the 13th Part 6 came out that same year and only cost $3 million, as did Texas Chainsaw 2, which cost around $4.5 million. So this was a solid amount of money for a non-franchise horror film. Unfortunately, it only pulled in around $600,000 in ticket sales, which may be due to the producers putting it into a limited release of only 70 theaters. Compare that again to Friday Part 6, which was in over 1,500 instead. When you take a look at the per-screen average, it's pretty easy to see that a wider release would have benefited the movie, and perhaps it wouldn't have been the bust that it was. It did around $3,500 per screen, which is actually not too shabby of a number. So it seemed like the blame here was more on the studio than the film. It also faced some stiff competition, with 60-some horror films released in '86, and besides the two that I mentioned above, there was also Aliens, The Fly, April Fool's Day, Critters, Deadly Friend, Invaders from Mars, Maximum Overdrive, and Poltergeist 2, all vying for their cut of filmgoers' cash. With so many others being a part of an existing IP or having a well-known creator at the helm, it's no surprise that Night of the Creeps got a little lost in the shuffle. Oddly enough, the film actually did have a sequel in Germany. You see, in 2007, there was a movie called Zombie Town, which involved alien parasites from space that take their victims as hosts and turn them into zombies in a small rural town. However, despite the similarities in plot, it was not a sequel, more like a ripoff. But because of this, when the film was released in Germany, it was titled Night of the Creeps 2: Zombie Town, and a few other foreign markets marketed it as a sequel, even if they never gave it the title. And no, James Gunn's Slither is not a sequel either, but it's pretty clear that it took some direct inspiration from this. The concepts are remarkably similar, though Gunn claims that he had never seen creeps before making his film, but yeah, I'm not really buying that. Like, what horror fan hasn't seen this? It's not really a straight-up ripoff, though, since it takes the idea and moves it in a different way, and even Decker himself said that he's fine with it, saying, "I don't believe there's anything original about Night of the Creeps." Recently, Tom Atkins set the internet on fire in an interview with horror website Arrow in the Head back in 2019, in which he stated that Fred Decker was interested in making a sequel. Atkins went on to say that he would want Cameron to come back somehow, and considering the original cast was still around, he stated that they'd be involved. Because of this, every single movie news site ran with the story that a sequel was in the works with the original cast intact and would pick up with those characters in their 50s. However, Decker would quickly respond on his social media, shooting the rumor down. He clarified that looking at the interview, Atkins' remarks clearly state what he would like to have seen in a sequel, and just that Decker was interested in it and nothing more, and that no actual plans for a follow-up were moving ahead. So, even though the director and most notable star from the film has a genuine interest in Part 2, there's nothing solid, and let's face it, it would need investors and the money to bankroll it, and without that, it looks like we're stuck with one movie. Lucky for us, that movie's nearly perfect as it is.
Detective, thrill me.
So there you have it. It is just one movie, and it probably will stay that way. I don't think we'll see a follow-up to this in any way, shape, or form, sadly. Maybe a remake at some point in the future, I don't know. Interestingly enough, the ending of the movie pretty much takes place exactly where I'm standing. I hope you enjoyed this look into this movie. I've been wanting to talk about it for quite a while now. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love it very, very much. And if you haven't seen it, you ought to check it out. It's a great flick. If you have seen it, you love it, let me know down below. If you would like to see some sort of follow-up, or if you're happy with it being where it is, just let me know that in the comments down below. Of course, like the video, share it out, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and check out my patrons at patreon.com/movietimelines, where you can go and help support this channel. I hope you do that. Hope you had a great holiday season, and we'll see you very shortly in 2022.